Identity. What is it? How well do you know this I you so constantly refer to? What makes you, you? Is it your sense of humor, race, gender, political stance, culture? In the field of psychology, theorists refer to the general system theory.
I.
Ak.
Na.
Mina.
In the second subsystem, you will find family, followed by the peer group, school, and finally, culture. Here we find ourselves at a place where all of these systems are one in the same. Welcome to the University of the Free State.
I'm a year 4 student. My culture is Zulu, and I'm very proud to be Zulu and be a student at UFS.
Ek is Afrikaans.
I am Khaled and I'm English.
I am Pedi, and anything interesting about my culture is that the people talk a lot and they talk fast.
I am Tsonga. What I love about my culture is that we have the Shibelane, so we came up with twerking, basically.
I'm Tswana, and I'm just a very bubbly person.
Very unique and different young people with very different views of both the world around them and themselves. The diversity that exists at South African varsities can both define and unite a generation. It can also tear them apart. But there is one group of students who remain untouched by the dividing characteristics that so often force members of society to have differing opinions. Students who define their I separate from themselves. It are these unique individuals who are often overlooked. The University of the Free State is one of only 2 South African universities to offer sign language as a 3-year curriculum. Deaf and hearing lecturers, together with deaf tutors, provide both hearing and deaf students an opportunity to undergo an intense training schedule which includes classes that focus on deaf history, deaf linguistics, and practical sessions to become familiar with the deaf culture and especially South African Sign Language.
Deaf people are bound by their culture, and we write deaf with a capital D to indicate that they belong to the specific culture. Firstly, they look at sign language, which is the most important thing in their culture. They will then first be capital D, deaf culture. Secondly, they will belong to a subculture like Afrikaans, English, Sotho, Zulu. And being deaf, you need to have certain things that's important to the culture, which is visibility. Vision is extremely important. So culture, for example, in some of the black cultures, respect is indicated by not looking at another person. Eye contact is not then allowed. But in deaf culture, it doesn't matter if you belong to that specific culture that doesn't allow eye contact. In deaf culture, it falls away because eye contact is so crucial. So it does not then indicate not respect, it then indicates respect, which is much different from the ethnical group that doesn't use eye contact. So that brings them together as one culture because they share the same things, they share the same language. It's not like that I'm Afrikaans, I'm English, I'm Sotho, I'm deaf, and that brings them together.
What I usually do, since I don't know sign language, I usually write what I want to say on my phone and then hand them my phone so that they can read what I'm trying to say.
Sometimes you tend to feel a bit bad for them.
I think that they're like misunderstood, and I just want like a communication, like some way of communication that isn't sign language, because for people that are able to hear, sign language is very tough. So I just want a communication link between people who can hear and deaf people.
I know very, very little about sign language.
I don't know anything about sign language.
There are two ways that I'd like to mention here that I think is important for thinking through the impact that language exerts on both identity and on the way that identity is perceived by others. One is that all languages sort of have different affordances through which we articulate our relation to the world, how we see ourselves and how we see others. And a key example in a case like this is that English, for example, doesn't have a gender-neutral personal pronoun. So you have to say he or she. There is no real way of saying it in a way that is also personal. And it means, for example, that that particular language is gendered in certain ways, in very subtle ways. It means that you almost always have to talk about an unknown person or an unknown thing as a he or she, and it limits the way that we can talk. So that's one of the ways in which language shapes what we can and can't do. And allied to that, a second point, I guess, is that we all have a sort of a general vague sense that languages are connected to culture. And to your question is, how does a particular language shape the way that other people perceive the speaker? And one of the key ways in which this happens is that even though we think of languages as simply connected to culture, it becomes a problem when we think of the differences between cultures as simply a question of diversity. In other words, if we think of them as something that we simply need to tolerate and simply need to accept about other people and get along, that's a problem if we don't think about the ways that languages become entangled in broader power relations.
Here we have a group of sign language students, currently in their second year.
I thought they were disabled. I thought they couldn't mingle with speaking people. I assumed that I could not communicate with them and they could not communicate back.
I thought sign language is not an actual language.
These students are asked what they thought of deaf people prior to them studying sign language, and how their opinions have evolved since then.
They're interesting. Honest.
They're very blunt. Yeah.
Misunderstood.
Few students really know anything about deaf sign language or the deaf culture when they arrive at the university. So in the first year they will say deaf people are disabled and don't know anything about that. And then a lot of our students take sign language as an extra subject because they need credits. And then they fall in love with the language when they realize it's a language and not just a movement of hands.
Where many regard the inability to hear as a disability, it is in fact the deafness itself which serves as the driving force and unifying factor between these individuals. Deaf South Africans find themselves in an especially unique situation. In a country that has 11 official languages, multiple cultures, and even cultures within cultures, it is very easy for the eye to get lost within this system. Because South African Sign Language is the first language of all deaf South Africans, your mother tongue serves as an additional language, only important in written form. Sign language serves as an entry point into the culture, equaling the playing field. Your mother tongue is no longer your identifier.
one of the avenues that we look at is how languages are already wrapped up and entwined in power relations, regardless of their particular grammatical structures. There are histories to them, and those histories shape which languages get used in what kinds of conditions and by how many speakers. It shapes how we perceive the speakers who use them. It shapes how we credit languages as developed or undeveloped, as useful or not useful.
Over the course of the past 3 years, the diverse system of South African cultures have become more prominent, as what was once believed to be a peaceful, stainless generation of New South Africa began showing signs of rust. A divide was born between cultures. Elsewhere, the members of Signals, a club for deaf students at the University of the Free State, are having a session outside in the sun. Of course, this homogeneous little piece of society doesn't come without its obstacles. Imagine a world where gender, race, socioeconomic class, and any other external defining traits did not classify you as belonging to a certain group, but rather a self-defined I, an identity that isn't born out of its relationship to a certain culture, but its ability to overcome daily obstacles.
Ek is Afrikaans.
I am Pedi.
I am black.
The ability to speak does not mean you have a voice. The ability to hear does not mean you are listening. South Africa has a self-proclaimed one country, one voice ideology. But how true can this really be when we look at what the deaf accomplishes every day? Every single person has his or her own I, but perhaps it's time to find something which transforms the I into something much larger than any one of us. Something larger than we were taught to be. An ideal. What would happen if we all focused on what makes us similar rather than what makes us different?